drought came like a curse from the gods. British wells ran dry. Hadza water sources vanished. Children from both worlds were dying of thirst. Eleanor Hartley, daughter of the cartographer who had mapped and sold Hadza sacred lands to colonial exploiters, knew her father's maps held a secret. Ancient Hadza wisdom hidden in coded symbols that only she could read. Kamau, the Hadza hunting prince whose family had been displaced by those very maps, had every reason to let the British settlers die. But when Eleanor proved that her father's betrayal was actually protection in disguise, they embarked on a desperate journey into forbidden territory to find the legendary spring that could save everyone. What neither expected was that the greatest discovery would not be water, but each other.
In dusty archives of the Royal Geographical Society building in Dar es Salaam, where maps of conquered territories lined walls like trophies of empire, Eleanor Hartley stood before her father's final collection with tears streaming down her face. She was 26 years old, with copper-red hair pulled back in a practical bun, and green eyes that had spent too many years studying her father's work, searching for answers that never came. James Hartley had been dead for 5 years, but his legacy haunted Eleanor like an accusation she could never escape. The betrayer of the Hadza, the colonial newspapers had called him. The man who sold paradise for crown sterling. His detailed maps of Hadza sacred lands, every spring, every seasonal water source, every hunting ground, had been purchased by the Colonial Land Commission and used to carve up indigenous territory for British plantations and settlements. Eleanor had been 19 when her father died, found collapsed over his drafting table with his final map clutched in his hands. His last words to her had been delirious, feverish. The symbols, Eleanor. Remember what I taught you. The symbols, protect them. She had dismissed it as the rambling of a dying mind consumed by guilt. But now, 5 years later, as the worst drought in recorded history turned East Africa into a dying landscape, Eleanor found herself returning obsessively to those final words. She had inherited all of her father's maps, journals, and surveying equipment. For years, she had kept them locked away, too ashamed to look at the instruments of her father's supposed betrayal. It was the drought that changed everything. By November 1892, Lake Eyasi had shrunk to half its normal size. The seasonal streams had vanished. British wells dug based on her father's geological surveys had gone dry one by one. The Hadza people, displaced from their traditional water sources by colonial settlements, were suffering even more desperately. Eleanor worked as a clerk at the Colonial Water Commission, a position far beneath her education, but the only one available to a woman, especially one bearing the name Hartley. Every day she processed reports of dying cattle, abandoned farms, and desperate settlers. And every day she heard whispers of Hadza people dying in the wilderness, too proud to beg for water from the colonizers who had stolen their lands. One morning, while organizing her father's papers to donate to the archive, Eleanor noticed something she had missed before. His final map, the one he had died creating, was different from all the others. At first glance, it looked like a typical survey map of the region around Lake Eyasi. But as Eleanor studied it under better light, she saw faint symbols drawn in iron gall ink that had aged nearly invisible. Symbols her father had taught her as a child, claiming they were cartographer's codes for different types of terrain. But these weren't standard cartographic symbols. They were Hadza symbols. Eleanor's heart raced as she recognized them from her father's anthropological journals. Symbols for sacred sites, ceremonial grounds, and most importantly, permanent water sources known only to the Hadza people. Her father hadn't been mapping these sites for exploitation. He had been documenting them in code to protect them, hiding ancient Hadza knowledge in plain sight, where only someone who understood both cartography and Hadza culture could decipher them. "Oh, father," Eleanor whispered, her hands trembling as she held the map up to the light. You weren't betraying them. You were trying to save them. But there was a problem. The symbols were incomplete, as if her father had died before finishing his work. And the most crucial symbol, the one that would indicate the location of the legendary Mother Spring that Hadza elders spoke of, was only partially drawn, ending in a streak of ink where his hand had apparently fallen. Eleanor knew what she had to do. She needed to find someone who could help her complete her father's work. She needed to find a Hadza elder who understood the ancient symbols. But 5 years of colonial displacement had scattered the Hadza communities, and those who remained were understandably hostile to any British person, especially one bearing the name Hartley. That evening, Eleanor made a decision that would change her life forever. She would go into Hadza territory herself, carrying her father's maps and his journals, and try to prove that James Hartley had been a friend, not an enemy. It was probably suicide. A young British woman alone in the wilderness during a drought, when tensions between colonizers and indigenous people had never been higher. But Eleanor couldn't live with herself if she didn't try. As she packed her father's surveying equipment, maps, and a small amount of supplies into a canvas knapsack, Eleanor discovered one more item in his map case, a letter addressed to her in his handwriting, sealed but never sent. With shaking hands, she broke the seal and read, "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I fear my life's work has been misunderstood. The maps I created were never meant to betray the Hadza people. They were meant to preserve the knowledge that colonial forces sought to destroy. I have hidden water sources that must remain secret, coded them in symbols that only a careful student could decode. I know the world will call me traitor, exploiter, villain, let them. But you, my brilliant daughter, you have the mind to understand what I truly did. The Hadza people have lived on this land for tens of thousands of years. They have survived droughts that destroyed empires. Their knowledge of water in this harsh land is sacred and irreplaceable. If drought comes, and it will come, you must find a way to share this knowledge with both peoples. Find Kamau, son of Chief Mambali. He is young but wise, educated by missionaries but rooted in Hadza traditions. Show him what I have done. He will understand. Save them, Eleanor. Save them all. Your loving father, James Hartley." Eleanor clutched the letter to her chest, tears flowing freely now. Her father hadn't been a villain. He had been a guardian of knowledge, working in secret to protect what the Empire sought to destroy. And now, 5 years too late, she finally understood. At dawn the next morning, Eleanor Hartley slipped out of her boarding house, carrying everything that mattered. Her father's maps, his journals, the letter, surveying equipment, and barely enough water for 3 days. She left behind a note for her landlady and the Colonial Water Commission stating simply, "I have gone to finish my father's work." She didn't know if she would survive. She didn't know if the Hadza people would kill her on sight, but she knew that somewhere in the wilderness, a man named Kamau might hold the key to understanding her father's final gift to a people he had grown to love more than his own empire. The journey into Hadza territory was harder than Eleanor had imagined. The landscape that her father's maps showed as grassland and acacia forest had transformed into a dying wasteland. The earth was cracked like broken pottery. Dead trees stood like skeletal fingers accusing the sky. Animal carcasses marked trails where desperate wildlife had sought water that no longer existed. By the third day, Eleanor's water was gone. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her fair skin had burned despite her wide-brimmed hat. She had followed her father's maps to what should have been a seasonal spring, but found only a dry depression filled with the bones of animals who had died waiting for water that never came. Eleanor collapsed in the shade of a dead acacia tree. Her father's maps spread around her like a cartographer's funeral shroud. She had failed. She would die out here, and with her would die the secret of her father's protective codes. The mother spring would remain lost, and both Hadza and British children would continue dying of thirst. "I'm sorry, Father," she whispered to the merciless sky. "I tried." It was then that she heard footsteps, not the stumbling steps of someone lost, but the purposeful, silent footsteps of someone who belonged to this land. Eleanor's heart raced as she struggled to sit up. Through her sun-dazzled vision, she saw a figure approaching, a tall Hadza man carrying a bow and wearing traditional leather garments, his body moving with the grace of someone who understood the wilderness as his true home. The man stopped a few meters away, studying her with dark eyes that showed no mercy, only calculation. He was perhaps 30 years old, with the bearing of someone accustomed to leadership. Beaded necklaces adorned his neck, and his face bore ceremonial scars that marked him as someone important in Hadza society. "British woman," he said in accented but clear English. "You are far from your settlements. This is not your land." Eleanor tried to speak, but her parched throat produced only a rasp. She gestured desperately to her father's maps spread around her, trying to communicate what words could not. The man's eyes narrowed as he saw the maps, and his expression hardened into something darker. "Hartley's maps," he said, and the name came out like a curse. "You carry the tools of our destruction." With enormous effort, Eleanor forced words through her cracked lips. "Not destruction, protection. Please, Kamau." The man's entire body went rigid. "How do you know my name?" "Father's letter. Your Chief Mambali's son. Father said, find you, show you truth." Kamau stared at her for a long moment, clearly torn between leaving her to die and his curiosity about what this daughter of his people's enemy might be trying to say. Finally, with a movement so quick Eleanor barely saw it, he uncapped a gourd at his belt and held it to her lips. The water was warm and tasted of leather, but it was the most beautiful thing Eleanor had ever experienced. She drank carefully, knowing that too much too quickly could make her sick. When she had drunk enough to speak properly, she looked up at Kamau with desperate intensity. "My father didn't betray your people," she said. "He was trying to protect them. These maps," she gestured to the papers around her, "they're in code. Hidden symbols showing where your sacred water sources truly are, so the Colonial Commission wouldn't find them. He died before finishing, before he could tell anyone what he'd done." Kamau's expression remained skeptical. "James Hartley mapped every Hadza sacred site and sold them to the British. Because of his maps, my family was forced from our ancestral lands. My father died of a broken heart, seeing our territory turned into plantations." "I know," Eleanor said, tears mixing with the dust on her face. "I know what everyone believes. But look at the maps. Really look at them. These symbols." She pointed to the faint marks her father had made. "These are Hadza symbols, aren't they? He was hiding your knowledge in plain sight." Kamau knelt down and picked up one of the maps, studying it closely. Eleanor watched as his expression slowly shifted from anger to confusion to something like wonder. "These symbols, how does a British woman know these?" "My father taught me. He spent 20 years learning from your people. He loved the Hadza culture, loved this land. The Colonial Commission demanded maps. He couldn't refuse without being imprisoned or worse, so he made maps that showed everything except what mattered most. He hid the real water sources in codes they couldn't read." Kamau sat back on his heels, his worldview clearly being challenged. If this is true, why? Why would a British man protect us? Eleanor smiled sadly. "Because not all colonizers are monsters, just as not all Hadza are saints. My father believed that knowledge belongs to the people of the land. He believed your people had earned their wisdom through thousands of years of surviving in this harsh place. He believed stealing that wisdom was more than theft. It was destroying something irreplaceable." She pulled out her father's letter and handed it to Kamau. "He wanted me to find you. He said you would understand." Kamau read the letter slowly, his finger tracing each line. When he finished, he looked up at Eleanor with eyes that had softened but still carried caution. Your father mentioned a mother spring, the eternal water source that has sustained my people through every drought in our history. He knew of it. He suspected where it was, based on Hadza oral traditions he had recorded. But he never went there. He said it was too sacred for an outsider. He was trying to encode its location so that if the drought came, someone who understood both worlds could find it and share it to save both peoples. Both peoples? Kamau's eyebrow raised. Why would we save the British who stole our land? Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Because children are dying, Kamau. Hadza children and British children. The drought doesn't care about politics or justice or who owns what land. If there's water that can save lives, shouldn't we find it? Wouldn't that honor both our fathers, yours who loved his people, and mine who died trying to protect them? Kamau stood up, pacing in the shade of the dead tree. Eleanor could see him wrestling with the decision. Every instinct probably told him to leave her there, to let the daughter of James Hartley die as poetic justice. But she could also see something else in his eyes, curiosity, the desire to know the truth, and perhaps a spark of the same compassion that had driven her father. The drought has killed 7 Hadza children this month, Kamau said, finally, his voice heavy with grief. 3 British children died last week in the settlement nearest to our territory. My grandmother, our oldest elder, says this drought is punishment from the ancestors for how we have abandoned our ways. Your government says it is God's judgment for our savage resistance. He turned to look at Eleanor directly. Maybe it is just a drought, and maybe 2 people from different worlds can do what their fathers couldn't, actually save lives instead of just talking about it. He extended his hand to help Eleanor stand. If you are lying, if this is some trick, I will leave you in the desert to die. But if your father's maps truly can lead us to the Mother Spring, I will help you decode them. Eleanor took his hand, feeling the calloused strength of a hunter who had survived in one of the harshest environments on Earth. As he pulled her to her feet, she felt something electric pass between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. 2 people from opposite sides of history, united by a common desperation and a shared loss. Thank you, she whispered. You won't regret this. Kamau gathered her father's maps carefully. I already regret it, he said, but there was the hint of a smile in his voice. But my father used to say that the bravest acts are the ones that feel like mistakes until they're finished. Let's see if your father was the villain everyone says, or the secret hero you believe him to be. Together, they began walking toward Kamau's hidden camp, where the real work of decoding James Hartley's final gift to the Hadza people would begin. Neither of them knew that this first step would lead them on a journey that would test everything they believed about loyalty, justice, love, and the price of forgiveness in a land where water was more valuable than gold and trust more rare than rain. Kamau's camp was not what Eleanor had expected. She had imagined a traditional Hadza settlement with grass huts and communal fires, but what she found was more like a resistance hideout, a carefully concealed cave system in a rocky hillside, invisible from more than 20 meters away. After the British took our traditional lands, many of us had to learn to hide, Kamau explained as they approached. We are not warriors by tradition. We are hunters, gatherers, peaceful people. But when your survival depends on staying invisible, you adapt. Inside the main cave, Eleanor found a small community of perhaps 15 Hadza people. Men, women, and children, all showing signs of the drought's toll. Their eyes were sunken, their movements slower than they should be. But when they saw Kamau bringing a British woman into their sanctuary, the reaction was immediate and hostile. An elderly woman stood up, her body bent with age, but her eyes sharp as obsidian. She spoke rapid Hadzan to Kamau, her tone clearly accusatory. Eleanor didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. Why have you brought our enemy here? Kamau responded in Hadza, gesturing to the maps Eleanor carried. The conversation grew heated, with several other adults joining in. Eleanor stood quietly, knowing that her fate, and possibly the fate of many children, hung in the balance of this argument. Finally, Kamau turned to her. This is Gogo Kijakazi, our eldest. She says that James Hartley's maps led to her son's death, my father, and she wants to know why she shouldn't kill his daughter as justice. Eleanor swallowed hard, then addressed the old woman directly, even though she knew Gogo Kijakazi didn't speak English. Please tell her that I cannot bring back her son, just as she cannot bring back my father. But I can honor both their memories by finishing what my father started, protecting Hadza knowledge so it can save Hadza lives. Kamau translated, and Eleanor saw the old woman's expression shift slightly. Gogo Kijakazi responded, and Kamau translated back. She says that words are wind. Show her proof that your father's maps are what you claim, or leave and never return. Eleanor carefully spread out her father's final map on a flat rock, then pulled out his journal. My father documented Hadza symbols for 20 years. He learned them from traders, from people who trusted him. Here, she pointed to a section of the journal. He wrote, the spiral means permanent water. The 3 dots mean seasonal spring. The broken circle means sacred ceremony site that must never be disturbed. She then showed how those same symbols appeared faintly on the map. Spirals marking locations that had been left off the official version given to the Colonial Commission. 3 dots where her father had reported unsuitable terrain. Broken circles around areas he had marked as dangerous cliffs to keep settlers away. Kamau leaned in close, studying the symbols. Then he spoke excitedly in Hadza to Gogo Kijakazi. The old woman approached, her weathered hands touching the map with surprising gentleness. Her finger traced one of the spirals, and she began speaking in a voice full of emotion. She says, Kamau translated, his own voice thick with feeling, that this spiral here marks the water source where she was born, where her grandmother was born, where 7 generations of her family came into the world. The British said there was no water there, that it was wasteland. They built a plantation 3 kilometers away and never knew the spring existed. Eleanor felt tears of relief. So you believe me? You believe my father was trying to protect these sites? Gogo Kijakazi spoke again, and Kamau translated. She says your father may have had a good heart, but he was still a fool. By making these maps, he created a key that could unlock our secrets. If the wrong person learns to read his codes, everything he tried to protect will be destroyed. That's why I need help, Eleanor said. The map is incomplete. He died before finishing it. The Mother Spring, he was trying to encode its location, but the symbol is only half drawn. Without someone who knows both the land and the traditions, I can't decode it. Kamau and Gogo Kijakazi exchanged a long look, communicating something that didn't need words. Finally, the old woman nodded once and spoke. She gives permission for me to help you, Kamau translated. But she says this, if we find the Mother Spring, we share its water with both peoples, or we share it with neither. The Hadza way is balance. We do not hoard, but we also do not let ourselves be exploited. Can you agree to this? Eleanor didn't hesitate. Yes, if we find it, we save everyone or no one. Over the following days, Eleanor and Kamau worked together decoding her father's maps. It was painstaking work, cross-referencing the symbols with Kamau's knowledge of Hadza traditions and Eleanor's understanding of her father's cartographic methods. They worked by firelight in the evening after Kamau returned from his daily hunting expeditions. He would bring back what little game still survived in the drought-struck wilderness, a hare, a guinea fowl, and share it with the camp. Eleanor noticed that he always gave the largest portions to the children, and often ate nothing himself. Why don't you take your share? she asked him one evening. Because I am young and strong. They are young and weak. A hunter does not feed himself while his people hunger. It is our way. Eleanor found herself constantly surprised by Kamau. The British colonial narrative painted Hadza people as primitive, barely above animals in the chain of civilization. But Kamau spoke 3 languages fluently, understood complex mathematical concepts needed for hunting trajectories, could read the land like her father read maps, and possessed a moral compass that put most civilized men to shame. You said missionaries educated you, Eleanor said one evening as they pored over a particularly puzzling symbol. But you chose to return to Hadza ways. Why? Kamau was quiet for a moment. The missionaries taught me to read English, to do mathematics, to understand Christian theology. For this I am grateful. Knowledge is never wasted. But they also taught me that my people's ways were inferior, our beliefs mere superstition, our culture something to be erased and replaced with British civilization. He looked up at Eleanor with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then I returned home and saw my father, a man who could track a wounded animal for 3 days across terrain that would kill most British soldiers, who could read the stars to know when the rains would come, who could settle disputes with wisdom that would humble any British judge. The missionaries called him savage. I called him great. I understand, Eleanor said softly. My father struggled with the same contradiction. He was part of the colonial system, but the more he learned about Hadza culture, the more he realized that civilization was a lie we told ourselves to justify theft. Their eyes met across the firelight, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that transcended their different worlds. They were both children of men who had tried to bridge the gap between cultures and paid the price for it. This symbol here, Kamau said, pointing to a marking on the map. It's not complete, but I think it might be showing a direction from specific landmarks. Your father wrote that the mother spring is where the earth remembers the old gods. Do you know what that means? Eleanor pulled out her father's journal, flipping through pages until she found a relevant entry. He wrote, "The Hadza speak of a place where the earth is still connected to the time before time, where water flows from the memory of creation itself. They will not tell me its exact location, rightfully so, but Elder Mambali hinted that it lies where 3 sacred things converge." Where 3 sacred things converge, Kamau repeated thoughtfully. In Hadza tradition, the 3 sacred things are the stone where the first fire was made, the tree where the first hunt succeeded, and the place where the first mother gave birth. They are not literal, they are symbolic of the 3 pillars of Hadza life: warmth, food, and family. Eleanor's mind raced. So we need to find a place that has all 3? Where would that be? That is the mystery, Kamau said. Every Hadza settlement has fire, hunting, and families. But my grandmother used to tell a story about a valley where all 3 first came together. A place so sacred that only chiefs may know its location, passed down through oral tradition from father to son. He fell silent, his expression troubled. My father was meant to tell me before I underwent the rites to become chief. But the British displacement happened before my rites were complete. He died before passing on the knowledge. Eleanor saw the pain in Kamau's eyes, the pain of a heritage interrupted, of knowledge lost to colonialism's violence. I'm so sorry, she said quietly. My father took so much from your people. Even when he tried to help, his very presence as part of the colonial system caused harm. Yes, Kamau said simply, but your father also gave something. These maps, imperfect as they are, preserve knowledge that would have been lost. Many of our elders have died in the drought and displacement. Their wisdom died with them. At least your father wrote some of it down. He pointed to a section of the map that showed 3 symbols very close together: a flame, a bow, and a circle. If I'm reading this correctly, Your father was trying to show that these three things converge somewhere in this region, about 40 kilometers northeast of Lake Ayasi. That's deep in the wilderness, Eleanor said. The driest, harshest part of the territory. Why would a permanent spring be there? Because that's where it's most needed, Kamau replied. The mother spring isn't just water, according to our traditions. It's the heart of the land. It exists where life should be impossible, as proof that the earth herself provides. If we can find it, we save everyone, Eleanor finished, both our peoples. Kamau nodded. Tomorrow we start the journey. It will be dangerous. More than a week through country where nothing grows and nothing lives. We will take what little water we can carry, but it won't be enough. If we're wrong about the location, we'll die out there. And if we're right, we save countless lives, Eleanor said. It's worth the risk. That night, as Eleanor lay on a sleeping mat in the women's section of the cave, she thought about the journey ahead. She had come to Africa to scatter her father's ashes and clear his name. Now she was embarking on a potentially suicidal expedition with a Hadza prince to find a legendary water source that might not even exist. But as she drifted off to sleep, she felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Purpose. And something else too. Something she barely dared to acknowledge. A growing attraction to a man who should have been her enemy, but was becoming something far more complicated. In the men's section of the cave, Kamau was having similar thoughts. He had spent 5 years hating James Hartley, blaming him for his father's death and his people's suffering. Now he was risking everything to validate that same man's secret life's work, guided by his daughter, who was proving to be nothing like the British women he had encountered before. Eleanor didn't treat Hadza people as curiosities or inferiors. She listened when he spoke of traditions. She respected Gogo Kijakazi's wisdom. She shared their meager food without complaint and never asked for special treatment because of her race or gender. Most surprisingly, she looked at him, not as a savage to be civilized, but as an equal to be respected. It was dangerous to feel this way about her, Kamau knew. Even if they succeeded in finding the mother spring, she was British and he was Hadza. Their worlds were at war, even if the two of them were not. But as he closed his eyes, he allowed himself to imagine a different possibility. One where a cartographer's daughter and a hunter prince could build something new from the ruins of their father's legacies. Tomorrow they would begin the journey that would test everything they believed about survival, trust, and the possibility of love in impossible circumstances. Neither of them could know that the greatest challenges would not be the physical dangers of the drought-stricken wilderness, but the internal battles they would face when they discovered that the line between duty to one's people and duty to one's heart is sometimes impossible to walk. They set out at dawn 3 days later, after Kamau had prepared everything necessary for a wilderness expedition. Gogo Kijakazi gave them her blessing in a ceremony that involved smoke from burning herbs and words in ancient Hadzain that even Kamau said he didn't fully understand. Prayers older than memory, asking the land itself for safe passage. Their party consisted of just the two of them. Kamau had argued for bringing more people, but Eleanor pointed out that a larger group would consume more water, and they barely had enough for two. Besides, Gogo Kijakazi had been firm. This was a journey for the children of the two dead men who had tried to bridge worlds. If James Hartley and Chief Mambali could not complete this work in life, their children would complete it in death or succeed where their fathers failed. Eleanor carried her father's maps, compass, and surveying equipment. Kamau carried 2 leather water bags that would have to last them more than a week. His hunting bow, a medicine pouch, and a knife carved from the thigh bone of an elephant, an heirloom from his grandfather. The landscape they entered was like walking into hell's waiting room. The earth was baked so hard it rang like pottery when struck, while what little vegetation remained was gray and lifeless, skeletal trees reaching toward a sky that gave no mercy. The sun was a hammer, the air a furnace, and every breath felt like inhaling fire. By midday of the first day, Eleanor understood why Kamau had warned this might be suicide. The heat was unlike anything she had experienced in Dar es Salaam or even in the town settlements. This was pure, unfiltered wilderness, and it wanted them dead. "How do you survive in this?" she gasped as they rested in the shade of an outcropping during the worst heat of afternoon. "You don't survive in it," Kamau replied, offering her a carefully measured drink from the water bag. "You survive despite it. The Hadza have lived here for tens of thousands of years, because we learned to be smarter than the land. We hunt at dawn and dusk when animals move. We rest during the heat of day. We read the land for signs of water underground. We take only what we need and leave the rest for tomorrow." He smiled slightly. Of course, that was before the British arrived and decided to teach us proper land management by fencing off water sources and grazing cattle, until nothing remained but dust. Eleanor flinched at the truth in his words. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it." "I know you are," Kamau said, his voice softer. "That's why I'm here with you, instead of letting you die in the desert. Your sorrow is real. That's rare in a British person." They traveled for 6 days, following the cryptic markings on her father's map and Kamau's knowledge of the land. Each day was harder than the last. Their water ration grew smaller. Eleanor's lips cracked and bled. Her fair skin burned despite the cloth she wrapped around herself. Kamau fared better. His body adapted to the harsh environment, but even he moved more slowly as dehydration took its toll. On the evening of the 6th day, they reached a point where 3 distinct geographical features converged. A formation of rocks that looked vaguely like flames in the setting sun, a dead baobab tree with branches shaped like a hunter's bow, and a circular depression in the earth that might once have been a pond. "Fire, bow, and circle," Eleanor said, her voice hoarse. "The 3 sacred things. This has to be it." But there was no water in sight. The depression was bone dry, filled with cracked mud and the scattered bones of animals who had died seeking the moisture that wasn't there. Kamau studied the area carefully, walking in widening circles. "If the mother spring is here, it's not obvious. We might have to dig, or perhaps..." He knelt down, pressing his ear to the ground. "The Hadza way of finding water underground. You listen for the sound of movement, the whisper of flow beneath the rock." For an hour, he moved across the area, listening at different spots. Eleanor watched with growing despair. They had less than a day's water remaining. If they didn't find the spring soon, they would have to choose between dying here or dying trying to make it back to camp. Finally, as the sun touched the horizon, Kamau stood up from his spot near the base of the rock formation. "Here," he said, "I hear something. Water moving, deep down, maybe 10 meters beneath." "How do we reach it?" Eleanor asked desperately. "We don't have equipment to dig that deep." Kamau was already examining the rock formation more closely. "These rocks, they're not natural. Look at how they're positioned. I think they were placed here by ancient Hadza, marking something." He began moving rocks, and Eleanor joined him despite her exhaustion. As they cleared away smaller stones, a gap appeared, the entrance to a cave system, deliberately concealed but not sealed. "This is it," Kamau said with certainty. "The mother spring is below." They lit a torch made from resinous wood Kamau had carried and descended into the earth. The cave system was narrow at first, requiring them to crawl on hands and knees through passages that seemed to grow tighter with each meter. Eleanor fought against claustrophobia, focusing on the sound of Kamau's steady breathing ahead of her. Then suddenly, the passage opened into a larger chamber, and they heard it. The sound of water, the most beautiful sound in the world. By torchlight, they saw it. A pool of clear water, fed by a spring bubbling up from deep within the earth, never touched by the drought above, because its source was far below the surface layer of soil and rock. Eleanor collapsed at the water's edge and plunged her hands in, drinking deeply. The water was cool, clean, tasting of minerals and earth and life itself. Beside her, Kamau drank as well, and for a moment they were simply two dying creatures finding salvation. When they had drunk their fill, they sat back against the cave wall, staring at the pool in wonder. "We found it," Eleanor whispered. "My father was right. It's real." "And now we face the harder question," Kamau said. "What do we do with this knowledge?" Eleanor turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "We share it, like we agreed. We save both peoples." "But how?" Kamau asked. "If we tell the British authorities, they will claim this land, build settlements around it, control access to the water. My people will be pushed aside again, allowed to drink only at British mercy. If we tell only the Hadza, we condemn British children to die of thirst, children who had no part in their parents' crimes." Eleanor hadn't considered this complication. In her desperation to find the spring, she hadn't thought about the politics of what came after. "What does the Hadza way suggest?" Kamau was quiet for a long moment, staring at the water. "The Hadza way is to share freely with those in need. We do not own the land. We are part of it, stewards, not masters. But the British way is to own, to control, to exploit. If we share freely, they will take greedily." "Then we need a third way," Eleanor said. "Not Hadza alone, not British alone, but something new. A partnership where both peoples have equal say in how the water is distributed." "Oh, the British will never agree to that," Kamau said bitterly. "They do not see us as equals." "The British authorities won't," Eleanor agreed. "But the dying settlers, the desperate farmers, the mothers watching their children waste away, they might. Desperation makes people reconsider their prejudices." She pulled out her father's journal, finding a blank page near the end. "We document this together. We write down the agreement here, in this sacred place. Anyone who wants access to the Mother Spring must sign a covenant. The water belongs to the land itself, to be shared equally between all peoples who live here, governed by a council of both Hadza elders and British settlers. No one controls it. Everyone protects it." Kamau looked at her with something between admiration and disbelief. "You really think people will agree to this? On both sides?" "I think people who are desperate enough to change will change," Eleanor said. "And those who won't, well, they can find their own water or die of pride. This spring saved our lives. Now we decide, do we hoard it or do we use it to build something better than what our fathers knew?" Kamau reached over and took the journal, studying Eleanor's proposed covenant written in her neat hand. "If we do this, both our peoples will call us traitors. The British will say you've given away empire resources to savages. The Hadza will say I've betrayed our secrets to colonizers." "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "Probably. But we'll know the truth, that we chose survival over pride, cooperation over vengeance, the future over the past." In the firelight of the sacred cave, with the sound of eternal water flowing behind them, Kamau made a decision that would change both their lives. He took Eleanor's pencil and added his own marks to her words, Hadza symbols alongside English text, making a document that belonged to neither culture alone, but to both together. Then he looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, seeing not the daughter of James Hartley or a representative of British colonialism, but a woman who had risked everything to finish her father's work of protection, who had crossed deserts and faced death to do what she believed was right. "I have something to confess," Kamau said quietly. "When I first saw you dying in the desert, I almost left you there. I thought, let the daughter of the cartographer die like my father died, slowly, of a broken heart, surrounded by what he loved, but unable to save it." Eleanor listened without speaking, letting him continue. But then I saw your father's maps in your hands, and I wondered, what kind of woman carries her father's work into the wilderness? What kind of daughter risks death to clear a dead man's name? So I gave you water, and it saved your life. But Eleanor, he reached out and took her hand. You saved something in me too. You gave me back the belief that not all British people are enemies. You proved that bridges between our worlds are possible. Eleanor felt tears rolling down her dust-covered cheeks. I've spent 5 years hating my father for what I thought he did. Now I understand he was trying to build exactly what we're building now, a way for both peoples to survive together. He just didn't finish it before he died. Then we finish it for him, Kamau said, and for my father. And for all the children dying because their parents won't stop fighting long enough to save them. In that moment, surrounded by ancient stone and eternal water, something shifted between them. What had started as a desperate alliance became something deeper, a connection that transcended the boundaries of culture, race, and history. They had entered the cave as the children of enemies. They emerged as partners in something new. They spent the night in the cave, safe from the desert heat, their water supplies replenished. And as they talked through the night about how to present their discovery, how to negotiate with both communities, how to protect the spring from exploitation, they found themselves talking about other things too. Hopes, fears, dreams of futures that might be possible in a world where water flowed freely and people chose cooperation over conflict. By dawn, they had a plan. They would return to Kamau's camp first, present their findings to Gogo Kijakazi and the Hadza elders. Then, with Hadza approval, they would go to the British settlement and propose their covenant. It was risky. Either side could reject the plan and try to seize the spring by force, but it was the only path that honored both their fathers' legacies. As they prepared to leave the cave, Kamau stopped Eleanor at the entrance. Before we return to the world and all its complications, I need to say something. Eleanor turned to face him, her heart suddenly racing. In Hadza tradition, Kamau continued, there is a ceremony called the lukuchuko, the choosing. When a man finds a woman who makes him want to build a life rather than just survive, he offers her a gift made by his own hands, asking if she will walk his path with him. From his medicine pouch, he pulled out a small carved figure, a woman carrying maps, walking beside a man carrying a bow. He had been carving it during their journey, in the quiet moments when Eleanor slept, using the bone knife that was his grandfather's legacy. I know we come from different worlds, Kamau said, his voice rough with emotion. I know that loving you might be the most complicated thing I ever do, but somewhere between the desert and this cave, I stopped seeing James Hartley's daughter. I started seeing Eleanor, the woman who risked everything for truth, who chose bridges over walls, who made me believe that maybe our people's stories don't have to end in tragedy. Eleanor took the carving with trembling hands, studying the delicate detail he had created. It's beautiful, she whispered. You made this for me. For you, he confirmed. Eleanor Hartley, will you walk my path? Not as British and Hadza, not as colonizer and colonized, but as two people who choose each other despite everything that should make it impossible? Eleanor looked up at him, this prince of a displaced people, this hunter who had shown her more honor than any British gentleman, this man who had taught her that love doesn't ask permission from history before it blooms. Yes, she said simply, yes, I will walk your path, and you will walk mine. We'll make a new path together, one that our fathers couldn't see but would have blessed if they could. Kamau pulled her close, and they kissed in the entrance to the sacred cave, sealing a promise that would be tested in the days to come. Above them, the merciless sun was rising again, but they faced it together. No longer two people divided by the past, but two people united by the future they chose to create. The journey back to Hadza territory took 4 days. Faster now that they weren't dying of thirst and because they had a mission driving them forward. When they arrived at Kamau's camp, Gogo Kijakazi took one look at them, at how they walked close together, at how they looked at each other, and smiled for the first time since Eleanor had arrived. "The spring has given you more than water," the old woman said in Hadzain, which Kamau translated. "It has given you what all elders pray for, a reason to build instead of just remember." The presentation of their findings to the Hadza community was intense. Some elders argued that sharing the Mother Spring with British settlers was a betrayal. Others pointed out that Hadza ways had always been about balance and sustainability. Hoarding a resource went against their deepest values. The debate lasted long into the night. Finally, Gogo Kijakazi spoke. "So our ancestors knew droughts like this. They knew that the land gives and takes in cycles. What they also knew was this. When you save a person's life, they become connected to you. The British children who drink from Hadza water will carry that debt in their blood. Perhaps this is how we win, not by excluding them, but by making them so dependent on our knowledge that they finally have to respect it." The wisdom of her words turned the tide. The Hadza elders agreed to the covenant, with conditions. Eleanor and Kamau would serve as liaisons, translating between both communities. Any disputes would be resolved by joint councils. And most importantly, the location of the spring would remain protected. People would have to come to designated collection points, not swarm the sacred site itself. The meeting with British authorities was even more contentious. The deputy colonial administrator, a man named Winston Pembroke, listened to their proposal with barely concealed disdain. "You're suggesting," he said with icy precision, "that British citizens should accept water from savages under conditions that treat said savages as equals. Miss Hartley, your father's reputation was already in tatters. Are you determined to destroy yours as well?" "My father's reputation," Eleanor replied with steel in her voice that surprised even her, "was destroyed by lies told by people who profited from his death. He spent 20 years learning from the Hadza because he recognized they had survived in this land for thousands of years, while British proper land management created dust bowls within a decade. The Mother Spring exists because Hadza wisdom protected it. Now it can save British lives, but only if we respect the people who preserve that knowledge." "And if we refuse your covenant?" Pembroke asked coldly. "Then children continue dying," Kamau said, speaking up for the first time in the meeting. His English was formal, careful, but his meaning was clear. "Hadza children and British children both. This drought will not end soon. Your wells will continue failing. The question is, what price is your pride worth? Is it worth more than the lives you were sent here to govern?" Pembroke's face reddened, but before he could respond, a woman's voice came from the back of the room. "I'll sign your covenant." A British settler woman stepped forward, her face worn by sun and grief. "My name is Margaret Wilson. I buried my daughter last week. She was 4 years old. She died of thirst, while politicians argued about dignity and proper procedure. If Hadza knowledge can prevent another mother from losing her child, then I don't give a damn about pride or protocol." One by one, other settlers stood up. Farmers who had watched their livestock die, mothers who had watched their children waste away, men who had come to Africa seeking fortune but had found only dust. They signed Eleanor's covenant, agreeing to equal partnership with the Hadza in managing access to the Mother Spring. Pembroke, seeing his authority eroding, had no choice but to accept the reality. He signed as well, though his signature was a grudging slash of ink that spoke volumes about his resentment. Within a week, the first water distribution system was established. Hadza hunters guided British workers to the cave entrance, where a pulley system was installed to bring water up without desecrating the sacred pool below. Distribution points were set up at neutral locations, staffed by both Hadza and British volunteers. The first time Eleanor saw a Hadza mother and a British mother standing in line together, sharing stories about their children while they waited for water, she felt something close to hope. The language barrier didn't matter. The universal experience of motherhood, of fighting to keep children alive in a dying land, transcended words. The water sharing system worked, but not without tensions. There were fights over distribution priorities, accusations of hoarding on both sides, British settlers who refused to accept water from savage hands, Hadza families who felt betrayed by what they saw as Kamau's capitulation to colonizers. Through it all, Eleanor and Kamau worked tirelessly as bridges between communities. They translated not just words but intentions, explaining British fears to Hadza people and Hadza values to British settlers. It was exhausting, thankless work, and they faced criticism from both sides. Traitor was a word Eleanor heard often from British settlers, who saw her partnership with Kamau as racial betrayal. Colonizer lover was whispered about Kamau by younger Hadza men who saw cooperation as weakness. One evening, 3 months after the water system was established, Kamau found Eleanor crying behind the water distribution shelter. He sat beside her without speaking, just his presence offering comfort. "I thought finding the spring would solve everything," Eleanor said finally. "I thought if we just showed people that cooperation works, they would change. But they don't want to change. They want the water, but they still hate each other." "Some do," Kamau agreed. "But not all. Did you see today? Young Jacob Wilson, Margaret's son, was playing with Hadza children at the distribution point, teaching them English words while they taught him Hadzain. They didn't care about politics. They were just children sharing a game." He took her hand. "Change doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from small moments repeated until they become normal. 10 years from now, Jacob and those Hadza children will be adults who grew up knowing each other as friends. They'll remember water lines where their parents stood together. That's how you change the world, one generation at a time." Eleanor leaned against him, drawing strength from his certainty. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing this path? Choosing me?" Kamau turned her face toward his. "Never. Not once. You are the bravest person I know. Braver than any hunter who faces lions, because you face something more dangerous. People's fear of change. And you do it every day without weapons, without armor, with nothing but belief that the world can be better." They kissed as the sun set over a land that was slowly, painfully, learning to share its resources and its future. Their wedding, 6 months later, was itself an act of bridge building. It combined Hadza and Christian traditions, with Gogo Kijakazi performing Hadza rites, while Father Michael, a progressive missionary who supported the Water Covenant, performed Christian ones. The wedding took place at the Mother's Spring Cave entrance, witnessed by both communities. Not everyone attended. Winston Pembroke sent a formal letter declaring the marriage an unfortunate alliance that will produce neither British nor Hadza children, but confused half-breeds belonging to neither race. Several Hadza families boycotted, saying Kamau had abandoned his heritage, but many more did attend. Margaret Wilson brought gifts of preserved food. Hadza hunters brought carved wooden blessings. Children from both communities served as attendants, standing together in a circle that symbolized the unity Eleanor and Kamau fought for every day. When Gogo Kijakazi blessed them in Hadzane, she said words that Kamau later translated. "These two have drunk from the same water, walked the same hard path, and chosen each other when the world told them not to. They will face storms that try to tear them apart, but water that has traveled deep through rock together emerges inseparable. So shall these two be, different streams that have become one river, flowing toward a future their ancestors could not imagine but would honor if they could." The compound Eleanor and Kamau built sat exactly halfway between the British settlement and Hadza territory, a deliberate geographic statement that they belonged equally to both worlds and fully to neither. It combined architectural styles: British brick with Hadza thatched roof, glass windows with woven grass screens, a water pump, and traditional clay pots for storing. Their home had become an unofficial embassy, a place where disputes came to be resolved, where children came to learn both languages, where the Water Distribution Council met monthly to address concerns from both communities. On a morning in 1897, 5 years after they found the mother spring, Eleanor stood in their garden watching their 3 children play. Amara, their eldest at 4, had her father's dark skin and her mother's green eyes, a visible symbol of 2 worlds blending. She was teaching her younger brothers, Thomas, 3, and Kipera, 2, a game that mixed British nursery rhymes with Hadza hunting songs, creating something entirely new. Kamau emerged from the house carrying surveying equipment. Eleanor had been teaching him advanced cartography, and together they were creating new maps of the region, ones that showed both British and Hadza place names, that marked sacred sites as protected rather than unexplored. Ready? He asked. Today they were leading a joint expedition, British surveyors and Hadza trackers, to map water sources throughout the region, ensuring that the mother spring wasn't the only source properly managed. Ready, Eleanor confirmed. She called to the children, who came running. They were being watched by Gogo Kijakazi and Margaret Wilson, 2 grandmothers from different worlds who had become unlikely friends, bonded by their shared love of Eleanor and Kamau's children. As Eleanor and Kamau rode out toward their day's work, they passed the marker stone that had been erected at the Mother Spring's cave entrance. It bore 2 inscriptions, one in English, one in Hadzain, but saying the same thing. Here 2 peoples nearly died of thirst. Here they learned to share water and survival. Here the children of enemies became family. Let those who come after remember, the land provides for all, but only if we provide for each other. The drought had eventually ended, as droughts always do. The rains had returned, but the lessons learned during those desperate years had remained. The water-sharing covenant had expanded into trade agreements, joint schools, intermarriages, and a hybrid community that was slowly rewriting what it meant to be British or Hadza in East Africa. It wasn't perfect. Prejudices persisted. Old men on both sides still grumbled about the corruption of their pure cultures. Winston Pembroke had been recalled to London, writing bitter reports about the unfortunate experiment in racial equality that he had been forced to tolerate. But the children? The children. They were growing up in a world where the choice between Hadza and British wasn't either or, but both and. They spoke multiple languages. They learned both hunting skills and mathematics. They saw interracial marriages as normal rather than scandalous. Do you think our children will remember the drought? Eleanor asked Kamau as they rode. They won't remember the thirst, Kamau replied, but they'll remember the stories. About their grandmother Gogo Kijakazi, who blessed a union everyone said was impossible. About their grandfather James, who hid knowledge in maps to protect people he loved. About their other grandmother, who stood up to colonial authorities. About their grandfather Mambali, who taught that true strength is knowing when to share rather than hoard. He smiled at Eleanor. And they'll tell their children, and those children will tell theirs, until the time when no one remembers that this was ever strange. A world where mapmakers' daughters marry hunting princes, where water belongs to everyone, where the color of skin matters less than the content of character. Eleanor took his hand as they rode. I love you, she said in Hadzain. I love you, he replied in English. Then together, in the hybrid language their children were creating, mixing Hadzain, English, and Swahili into something new, they said, Twende pamoja. Let's go together. Behind them, in their garden, their children continued playing games that had no name in either of their parents' original cultures. Games that were simply theirs, belonging to a generation that would grow up knowing that the impossible was just something no one had been brave enough to attempt yet. And deep beneath the earth, in a sacred cave where 2 desperate people had once found salvation, The mother spring continued flowing, eternal and patient, waiting for the next generation that would need to remember that water, like love, is stronger when it's shared.